Well, welcome everyone. I'm Penny Cook with Pioneer Network, and you are here for our live event, The Path to LGBTQ Equity and Inclusion, using resident-directed principles to guide the way. This is a collaboration of the Eden Alternative and Pioneer Network, and this is the third in our 2021 series. And I am here with my friend and colleague, Laura Beck from the Eden Alternative, who will be sharing this stage with me today, and our wonderful speakers, and I can't thank them enough. We have Cheryl Whalen, who is the Director of National Education Initiatives for SAGE, where she directs the operations of programs such as SAGE Care and the National Resource Center on LGBT aging. She also serves as the SAGE lead for the Long-Term Care Equality Index, or the LEI, which you'll be hearing more about. And that's a benchmarking tool for LGBTQ inclusivity. Cheryl has over 25 years of professional experience in the fields of education, disability, and LGBT older adult advocacy. And then we have Dan Stewart. Dan is the Associate Director of the Aging Equality Project at the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. He's the foundation's lead for the Long-Term Care Equality Index. And through his experience as a gerontologist, his former work as a researcher, and his dedication to advocating on behalf of the LGBTQ community, Dan shares his expertise on best policies and practices for LGBTQ elders nationally. So thank you all for being here today, and thank you all for listening in. And just so you know, before we start, we want to hear from you throughout. So please chat in your comments and questions, and along the way, we'll be stopping and we'll be trying to answer those. So Dan, I want to turn it over to you because I know that you have some great words to say. And Laura, I know that you're a part of this as well. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Penny. And on behalf of myself and Cheryl, thank you for having us here. We are big fans of the Pioneer Network, of Eden Alternative, and truly, what does it mean to shape our field, in the aging field, into a source of support, of a field that sees individuals for who they are, and then has that operational long-term access and really long-term support of what does it look like. So we're really happy to be here today to share information about the Long-Term Care Equality Index, which is, as you stated, Penny, both a benchmarking tool and self-assessment tool for residential long-term care communities and senior housing providers to learn what are the benchmarks, what can we do as a community, what can we do as an organization to really lead the way on person-centered care, but doing so in a concentrated long-term effort. So very happy to share more information about the LEI and share amongst myself and Cheryl of how we've seen this really integrate within other communities, as well as what we know as fields in LGBTQ advocacy, being in this field, and also the stories that we hear. And I think both Cheryl and I have some stories to share of folks that we know that are aging as LGBTQ, and happy to be here to share how can we support both individually, systemically in that effort.
Wow, Dan, thank you so much for clarifying what the LEI is. And so it really tees us up to have an interesting conversation, because there's something that the Pioneer Network and the Eden Alternative share, and that's that we're both guided by resident-directed principles. And so what we believe is that in working to provide equity and inclusion for LGBTQ elders, that these same principles and concepts can actually help provide a pathway. And so we're kind of looking to you two today to help us explore how we can connect the dots here, right? So I'm just going to dive into the first question. The Eden Alternative teaches us that this is one of our principles: a caring, inclusive, and vibrant community enables all of us, regardless of age or ability, to experience well-being. And Pioneer Network reminds us that we need to promote the growth and development of all. So bearing in mind how these two create a Venn diagram, how does all of this line up in terms of getting incorporated into the Long-Term Care Equality Index, and how is it put into practice to support the LGBTQ elders?
Thank you for that question. And I really love in development of our conversation today of finding these Eden principles, these Pioneer Network principles that overlap really with what does it mean to provide an inclusive and vibrant community. And with the LEI, the intention is how can we support long-term care service providers, long-term care resident housing providers in how do we see LGBTQ older adults? How do we see that when someone walks through the door? How do we know that when people are filling out paperwork? But in addition to that, and I think that's the key word of vibrancy and a vibrant community, is not just seeing individuals, but celebrating. And carrying that over with the Pioneer Network principle of growth and development for all is that inclusivity and that journey for inclusivity is more than just LGBTQ elders, right? It includes staff, it includes family members, and it includes really shaping a cultural intention within a community of how do we see and provide that in-depth level of care. And so with the Long-Term Care Quality Index, it is a structured participation in which folks have the opportunity to review their policies to see in what ways are we providing that caring and inclusive environment. Because what we know, in order to create long-term change, it's not just having the spirit and the heart behind it that is such a critical piece, but we must also have the policies. We must also have the procedures, the training, the environment that is promoting the growth as an organization, but also promoting the growth within the diversity, within the welcoming level and the inclusion within a community and with those that are living there. And so really the intention is in how we developed these benchmarking systems, and specifically as well, is that we worked with long-term care professionals. We asked LGBTQ elders. We work with LGBTQ advocates, lawyers, things of this sort, so that we can get a better sense of what does it mean to provide long-term inclusive care, that is adding on to a rainbow sticker and that visualization of inclusivity, but also making sure that that's framed in a long-term goal. Very similar to this idea of culture change. It's long-term. It's ever constant. And so, it's with our pleasure to be able to provide a resource that folks can use and grow with them in that process. Cheryl, you have something to add?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think this is a great question, and I really like the way you framed it, Laura, around all. And, I really encourage long-term care communities to look at their own mission statements. And when they think about their mission and their value and how they want to serve the community, are they really wanting to serve all within their community or some? And if they really want to serve all, then they have to look at, how are we doing outreach to underserved communities? How are we reaching LGBTQ individuals and other folks who may not oftentimes be, seen as much in our long-term care communities? So I really like people to think about the all, in those mission statements. And then also, I think in line with, the Eden Alternative and with the Pioneer Network, the Long-Term Care Quality Index also has a person-centeredness approach for the long-term care community, because we're meeting long-term care communities where you're at. And we know that the process is going to be different for everyone. So, this may be the first time that long-term care communities have really stopped and thought about how LGBTQ people are a part of their organizations and their mission and their outreach. And so we're meeting people where they're at. We're meeting organizations where they're at and helping them move through the process.
I love that you both said that. There's so much to what you both said. And I think that one of the things that I appreciate so much about the LEI and Pioneer Network has been involved with you on this project, is that it is so applicable to everyone. You know, obviously you developed it for a specific reason, but you're right in that it aligns so nicely, you know, with what we talk about, with that individualized approach to get to know people, to understand people, to make sure that we are meeting individuals' needs. So I just think that, you know, it's a great tool for communities to use for so many different reasons. And Laura, I know you were going to say something as well.
Oh, no, I love what you just said. And I think I just wanted to, you know, like you were emphasizing the word all. I really appreciated how you made a point of saying, we'll meet you where you are. Because I think that for some communities who really want to do the right thing, maybe they don't know where to start. They're like timid because they're afraid they're going to misstep or do it wrong or look like their heart's not in the right place. That you normalize the process by using that kind of language. I think it's really important, and just appreciating and acknowledging that.
Yeah, we love the words that you're using because they so resonate with both of us. So you know, we really did want to tie this into the principles of the Eden Alternative and Pioneer Network. So another one of the principles that are similar for both organizations. For Eden, it's we thrive when we have easy access to the companionship we desire. And at Pioneer, we talk about promoting the value of knowing each person, that relationships are the building blocks of a transformed culture, the community is this antidote to institutionalization. So applying these principles to the all is really the goal. So what have you seen as some of the challenges faced by LGBTQ elders related to loneliness and the challenges of really being part of a community when they move in to a senior living community or a nursing home?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Penny. You know, when we think about the importance of relationships and sense of community for LGBTQ older adults, you know, we know that our community is at increased risk for social isolation.
Right.
And, you know, some of that has to do with the fact that many of us don't have children. We may be estranged, you know, from our kinship families. And so our relationships and our social networks might look different. You know, we may have a network of all older adults that are the same age as us. And, you know, that may be the network that we've always relied on. And then, you know, we know as people start to age and start to experience their own, you know, health concerns and issues around aging, that network may become more fragile. So we're at increased risk of continued isolation and the need for support that we might find in long-term care communities. So it's so important that we think about, you know, who are the significant relationships for LGBTQ older adults. It may not be, you know, their children or a relative. It may be, you know, that friend that they've had this lifelong, you know, relationship with, who's going to be there providing that support to them. And so part of what, you know, we talk about with the long-term care quality index is that we're really, you know, here to hear the story of LGBTQ older adults and get to know them and who's important to them in their lives. And so those are, you know, some of the issues that really come to mind for me as I think about the importance of community and long-term care communities. Dan, do you have anything else to add?
You know, when we talk about loneliness, I always think of, you know, there's a prominent study and figure that loneliness can be as a, you know, negative on one's health as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And we then put that in the context of historical systemic discrimination and legal discrimination for our older adults. So recognizing also the context in which, as an organization, as a service provider, really what we're talking about is not just addressing those barriers to care in terms of making sure we have inclusive forms or welcoming policy and being you know, direct about that. It's also recognizing we are making change and changing the narrative of what LGBTQ elders have known healthcare to be, would have known support to be, because when you are engaging with healthcare providers that in the 70s were labeling you as mentally ill because of your sexual orientation, of course there's going to be a hesitancy to try to seek care where not only are you seeking, this is an outpatient, this is longer term. So when we look into the benefit of long-term care communities is that socialization. And so, in what ways are we supporting staff and making sure they know how to facilitate that engagement, facilitate, development of relationships? Because, folks, LGBTQ individuals moving into a long-term care community want to be themselves, want to focus on themselves, want to be able to engage in their environment and not necessarily be, Dan, the trans older man that's in the corner, right? Because the reality is that there's so many elements of our identity. And I love in the principles that we're talking about, it's focused on an individualized approach and how we see people, but in the context of what are our values as an organization, what drives us and ensuring that we are meeting those needs, because we would never want a resident that's in our community to feel lonely, because there's not a reason for that. And so, I believe that with, the training that's out there, with folks having this desire, Laura, you were speaking about the timidness, we believe that most providers want to provide the best quality care. And so, it's exciting to be able to share what does that look like, so that folks know that when they're accessing long-term care, especially if we're talking skilled care, assisted, things of that sort, that again, there's a benefit that's being gained. It's not just a loss of ability. It's not just a loss of my home or my social network. It doesn't have to be that way, right? It can be a support that'll help me live a healthier, hopefully have an easier experience trying to maintain health and well-being.
Can I piggyback on that real quick, Penny? Is that all right with you?
Okay.
So I love that the last word or expression you just used was well-being. At the Eden Alternative, we have 7 domains of well-being, and one of them is security. And so as I was listening to both of you speak, what really struck me was that part of protecting one, and tell me if I'm off target or on target, but protecting somebody from isolation is creating a sense of profound safety and security. And, that's an educational piece, right? How do you create a sense of safety for someone who's been dealing with oppression all their lives? Right. And so I'm just wondering if you want to comment on that, maybe share some of the ways that the LEI can support communities in knowing how to educate properly.
Right. I think part of it, Laura, is really, it does go back to policies and procedures, right? I mean, that's the benchmark. We need to make sure that we have policies and procedures in place that, ensure that we are providing, services that are based on well-being for all individuals who are coming into care. And, I don't think that can be stated enough. It starts with policies and procedures, which should include, training and cultural competency awareness. And, how do we best support folks? So I think that's key.
Thank you.
It's so interesting that you say that, because one of the things that I was thinking about when you were both talking, and it goes with that safety and security, is the creation of home. One of the things that, we've talked about so much at Pioneer Network, and I know at the Eden Alternative too, is really, what does it mean to feel like you're home? What are the components of that? And a big component of that is that feeling of safety and security and comfort, all of those things. And I think that's why this is so important too, is because how else do we create home unless we address those issues? So I think that, it just all ties in so beautifully what you're talking about.
Penny, I'm thinking this might be a good moment just to put in a plug for those of you who are listening in, that we really want your comments and your questions. So if you're being timid, don't be timid. This is your chance, right? So just want to hear from you guys as well.
Definitely. We know that for some of you, as Kathy Lieblich said, this is near and dear to your hearts. And it really is near and dear to our hearts too, because it's really talking about how we can create that experience of optimal well-being for everyone who lives in communities.
Yeah.
And before we leave this question, I also just wanted to add, one of the stories that will always stick with me is from early on in my career working within the LGBT older adult community. I was meeting with a group of women, and I asked them the question, should that time come when you need support in assisted living or skilled nursing, what will you do? What will that look like? And finally, one of the women spoke up and said, I guess we're just going to have to move. We're going to have to move to a state or city that's more accepting of LGBTQ older adults. And that just wasn't the answer. And it's not the answer. People should be able to age in their community where they've always lived, where they've worked, where their neighbors and friends are. That's what brings community. And, I think that's what's so important about the Pioneer Network and the Eden Alternative is, we're helping people find that the place in their community that they can look at as potentially their home when that time comes.
That is such an excellent point, Cheryl. Thank you for sharing the story.
And I love you bringing up that there are people actually considering leaving a place that they may have lived all their lives. That's such a vital part of identity. And so it's, it's just totally contradicting what the efforts are here, is to really celebrate the identity of every individual. So really sad to hear that. Okay, should I dive into the next question? Here we go. Pioneer Network reminds us that we need to recognize that culture change and transformation are not destinations, but a journey, and that it's always a work in progress. And as stated in Principle 10 of the Eden Alternative, building a collaborative and resilient culture is a never-ending process, and that we need to keep learning and developing and adapting always. So in our work, we tend to hear the horror stories of how things went wrong, but we know that there are communities out there that are doing things right. They're building resident-directed cultures. And so we'd love to hear some examples, and maybe just have you provide some ideas for how a community can use the LEI to guide them in their work, whether they're just starting in all of this or they're continuing what they've begun.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. As we move into examples, because I know we have examples from LEI participants as well as examples from across the U.S. I think just to reiterate how the LEI truly wants to meet organizations where they're at, because there's a difference between an organization in California or New Jersey where there are policies, governmentally that need to be put in place or whatever it may be. But what we found in these success stories in terms of going back to that culture change is that it's not just within training and how do we support the resident, but how are we supporting our LGBTQ employees? How are we welcoming family members? A lot of older adults now have family members that are LGBTQ and publicly so. And so in terms of what we've seen success-wise in touching back on creating that security of organizations, especially now as we know that we are in a need for more direct care service providers within long-term care, is the idea of ensuring not just non-discrimination policies for residents, but for visitors and for employees. And so that we are creating an environment, not just with our residents, but also the staff, that mirrors the general public, that includes LGBTQ employees and things of that sort, because it really is that deeper understanding of one's own personal experience and then allies to be able to see that. And Cheryl has some really key examples of what does it mean to be an ally and show up, even if you don't necessarily know what to do, even if your organization doesn't have necessarily a policy at this particular time. And then, being able to jump in and connect how this happened, how can we support that action again through policy? So Cheryl, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, so, I think from the, just really looking at building that collaborative nature, like Dan said, you may not have the policies and procedures in place yet, but you can be an ally. You can help support, LGBTQ residents, their families by being there, by listening to their stories that, need to be shared, and by helping to start your organization on the path to becoming more LGBTQ inclusive and welcoming. So I think we encourage, professionals in the field to really step up and be that ally, to be that voice that says, let's consider becoming a part of the LEI. We've recently seen some folks in my circle who have moved into long-term care, and I think the long-term care community, wanting to know how long have you, been in a relationship with your significant other, partner, or spouse. Can we honor that relationship? Can we lift up that relationship? Making sure that we're really recognizing, who the family of choice is that may be coming in to visit, and making sure that, long-term care communities know that these are the folks that are important, to this relationship. And really just allowing people to share their story, that's so important. And so those are just some of the initial things that come to mind as I think about this larger, story that we're trying to share.
So I'm really interested to know, how do you feel overall that senior living communities are doing? You have exposure to so many communities across the country, and we know that there are so many challenges in senior living. And I think it's been said earlier, for the most part, communities want to do what's best for the residents who live there. There's no doubt, and for the staff who work there. But we know that there are so many challenges going on right now. What are you seeing? What are you seeing right now?
I think what Cheryl and I are both seeing is very promising. I've been doing this work for about 8 years at this point, and seeing the level in which organizations are proactively engaging with us, that are actively seeking information, not just on what is LGBTQ aging, but really, pinpoint, I have a transgender resident. How do I ensure that they are protected through room policy? How do I explain that to my staff? And so the level in which people are engaging, they recognize now that they have LGBTQ residents and are at a space where folks, are starting to recognize that there's a little bit more work that we can do to feel better prepared. And the reality is that, it's not just on the aging field. We live in an ageist world. So that translates within the LGBTQ community as well. And so we are recognizing and having visibility of this generation. And the reality is that we are aging as LGBTQ people and living longer. And so those additional supports are really critical for folks to feel seen and supported in that. But it has been really beautiful to see the amount of participants that we've had. We came out with our initial first report, the Long-Term Care Quality Index 2021, that looked at self-assessments that long-term care providers filled out for us. We had over 72 organizations sign on that included 2 major long-term care provider systems, and within that had over 150 communities. We now, since that publication, have had multiple system sign-ons. We're looking at about 300 plus communities at this point that have signed on, and we're happy to put out the link to the LEI participant map as well. And so even with there's such a hunger for it, and that really comes out of people's goodness of their heart, also recognizing that we may not have that support that we need. And the reality is we live in a patchwork of protections when it comes to LGBTQ folks, and half of LGBTQ elders live in a state where they can be denied housing. And so these are actual real actions that we need to take to counteract the inequality that we're seeing legislatively as well. So, and it often is started by individuals that, are LGBTQ themselves or allies, or, recognize we should be doing this way, aren't we now? And so it's really heartening to see this and to see folks jump in, and I'm sure Cheryl can add to the experience of running an organization in Missouri as well.
Yeah, I was just going to share. I first started this work back in 2008. And when I would walk into a room to do a presentation, and it could be long-term care providers, home care companies, social workers, whoever, was in that space, I would ask the question, how many of you are currently serving LGBTQ older adults? And oftentimes arms were folded and they would shake their head. Nope, nope. We don't serve LGBT older adults. I was like, really? Do you not serve LGBTQ older adults, or is it that you haven't allowed the space for people to feel safe and welcomed in sharing about, their sexual orientation, their gender identity, what their needs are to really be supported, in these environments? If we walked into that same room today and asked the same audience, they would probably raise their hands and say, yes, we are serving LGBTQ older adults. So, from 2008 to 2021, the narrative is changing. People are more, I think, familiar, more open to hearing our stories, and they want to be a part of, serving and supporting LGBTQ older adults. So I think that's how the story has changed.
It makes me so happy to hear that. It warms my heart when I hear that, and when I hear some of the numbers, Dan, of who you're reaching and the communities that you're reaching.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that Meredith just added in the comment box that there is a map where you can actually search the long-term care communities that you're saying are logging on and participating, which is really exciting. I have a question for you that came up for me. It's often said that strategies and tools are as robust and valuable as the process that created them. And I heard you at the very beginning sharing the level of participation and the different stakeholders that you brought to the table in creating the LEI. And I was wondering if you would tell us a little bit more about that process and how those different stakeholders came together to shape and form the LEI.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that's it's a really exciting piece of what we are doing with the LEI. So coming from the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, we have a series of indices. Our longest running is the Corporate Equality Index. So really seeing how do we formalize indicators of LGBTQ inclusivity. And so for our long-term care equality index, it's based on our 14-year health equality index with our hospital systems. And in doing that, following that pattern that has been shown in communicating, providing that self-assessment, providing that technical assistance. And so when looking into what do we need within these communities, where are the gaps, we work with a number of organizations. One back in 2015, I believe, we did a feasibility study with Leading Age, specifically talking to long-term care providers about, where do you feel that you're at? How would this index be helpful? What does it look like? And that gave us, insight and firming what we've seen in the field. Again, a great desire to participate, fear of maybe not, meeting the needs or meeting what standard that there may be. And so a big piece of what we do with the LEI, Cheryl said, is this idea of meeting people where they're at. And that included making sure that when we developed the survey that we spoke and had on our National Advisory Committee, folks that are administrators at various long-term care communities, CCRCs. We have representatives from Pioneer Network, wonderful Joan Devine, who serves on our advisory council, members from the National Consumer Voice, really ensuring that the people that are at the table are folks that are, understand the field, that see what are the challenges of what it means, especially during COVID, in terms of policy practice, in terms of, grief, being able to see, a deeper glimpse as well in which ways, when we're asking these questions, we are talking about policy and practice. So what does that mean? That probably means going through some sort of general counsel. It probably means operationally having to take these steps and proposals and things of that sort. And so being able to model that support, that SAGE has had an expertise of LGBTQ aging alongside with a set guide, a resource guide that goes through each individual policy and why we're asking it, is creating really a conversation. Because for our surveys that have been, 20, 15 years old, we're always adding new questions, because the reality is that we're pushing the field forward. And what we're doing now is just seeing where the field is at and recognizing that this is a journey that we're all undergoing together. And the way to do that is, one step at a time. And we're very happily here for every step that there is. And, I think, just speaking for both Cheryl and I, the work that we do is so critically based on relationship building within aging service providers and networks and, membership organizations. And thankfully, we've had a lot of voices at the table showing up because they care, because they want to make sure that it's effective, and that ultimately that it is creating that level of change that we're intending to.
And I would just share along the process. Part of this is that SAGE and the HRC Foundation were having conversations at least 7 years prior to the Long-Term Care Equality Index launching. So, it's been a long process of, really thinking about why this was important and how is the best way to move this work, into the long-term care community. Just as Dan said, that they were, doing the work with the Healthcare Equality Index. And so we're just really excited to see this, become one of the new indexes that really helps support LGBT aging.
I think it's so important, and I'm wondering, one of the questions that now has come up for me is that if I'm an LGBTQ elder, do either, and I feel like I should know the answer to this question, but do either one of your organizations then help elders themselves, help consumers who are looking at, okay, what is my future going to be like? What if I need to move into a residential living community? And how, for instance, can the LEI help them as they're making that decision?
Yeah, so through through SAGE and the National Resource Center on LGBT aging, we have a number of educational materials that are available and that are geared towards the LGBTQ older adult, their care partner, spouse, whoever that may be, that's helping maybe to make those decisions. So we have some really good resources on care planning and what that looks like. We've worked with the long-term care Equality Index. Of course we have. That's what we're talking about today. We've worked with Consumer Voice to help develop some forms and again, educational materials that can really help people to document, like, what are their needs? How do they want to be supported? Should they need to go into long-term care, and make sure that it has an LGBTQ lens? We've helped to identify how visitation rights within long-term care, support the LGBTQ resident and their family or support person. So those are things that we're always, developing and looking at new ways to help build that level of support and education. We also have a SAGE hotline that is ran through a national partner, and that hotline is available to help people identify resources that they may need in their local community. And so that's another way that we help support people. We have a network of affiliates across the country as well, so folks can get in contact with their local affiliate and look for those services that are available at the local level. And then along with the LEI, we also run the SAGE Care training and credentialing program. and folks can go there and see what organizations have completed cultural competency training. And so that's another way to start to measure, if an organization at least has taken that step to do, cultural competency training for their staff. So those are just a few things that, come to mind in how we help support folks who are looking for services. The long-term care quality index is really that next step when it comes to long-term care communities. It's our goal that, one day people, wherever they live, will have choice in being able to look at the long-term care quality index and identify, a welcoming long-term care community that they can access and have true choice, and not just, one option, but true choice where they can go for support and care.
I was just going to say, I love the true choice piece of that, because so many times we think we're providing choice, or we say that we're providing choice, but it really isn't that true choice. Laura, I think you were going to chime in too.
I was actually just wondering if there's anything else you want to share, if you had the opportunity to say maybe one or two things to communities that are starting to figure this out for themselves. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you think they need to hear?
I'm going to let Dan go first.
Okay, I saw you going for the mute button. I think what we're talking about here is, how do we see someone? And how do we see and honor someone? And part of that is not the narrative of, you're just like me, I see you as a person, and even though I don't know your story, we're the same, because that's not true. I mean, that would take away the beauty of what it means to be people and in relationships with one another. So, we can prepare ourselves and learn the facts, have the resources, but ultimately what it comes down to is relying on that heart and that skill that brought folks into this field in the first place, right? I have the honor of teaching, MSW gerontology students, and it can be hard to get, it's hard, sometimes working in the aging field and long-term care. But those moments are beauty of letting people, regardless of what their health, regardless of where they are in terms of physical well-being, that we're focusing on what does it mean to be well, and part of being well is being seen and celebrated. And so, there's such a real opportunity that is incredibly important here, that is making, systemic lifetime change for future generations of LGBTQ people, because our aging population is growing, we're diversifying, being out and open about our identities, and it's time that we use our skills together in order to prepare one another in that. That's a very lengthy 1 to 2 words, so I'll pass it on to Cheryl.
I would just add that my takeaway, especially for long-term care communities that are joining us, and also LGBTQ individuals that may be joining us today, just as we're creating like the best practices for long-term care communities around LGBTQ inclusivity, we're also creating resources for the LGBTQ older adult, so that they can start to evaluate the long-term care communities. We know we have systems where you can call up and see, how does a long-term care community rate, in the state. But that rating doesn't include LGBTQ inclusivity, right? So we're preparing, support for that LGBTQ older adult and their care partners to help them evaluate the long-term care community that they may be going to. And so, I just wanted to share that as another resource that's coming out of this, and for long-term care providers to know that LGBTQ community members, we're used to evaluating where we're going to go. And there are key things that we look for. And if you don't have a welcoming policy that's inclusive of sexual orientation and gender identity, then we may look right past you and go to the next community until we find that place that is welcoming and supportive. So that's one of the things that we really encourage, long-term care providers to take note that, we do evaluate service providers as individuals, and we want to have choice. And, so I just hope that folks will take that into consideration and really think about becoming a part of the Long-Term Care Quality Index.
That's a great statement that you made, Cheryl. And I think that it's that multi-pronged approach that you're taking, that you are letting people know that you're educating LGBTQ elders. And you're also putting forth that you are more than willing to help educate senior living providers. And so I think it's that synergy by going about it both ways that's just so important in the work that you're doing. And as we started this, so many of the things you talk about align so nicely with the principles and values of both of our organizations, with the Eden Alternative and Pioneer Network. And we just love that you're out there promoting that individualized approach, that you're promoting the optimal well-being for every individual and helping providers to do that as well.
Echo that completely.
So we just want to thank you so much for being here with us today. This has just been such a great conversation. And I know from Pioneer Network, we are so happy to be working with SAGE and the Human Rights Campaign on this. So thank you so much.
And thanks for the Eden Alternative as well. Sorry, Penny.
No, I was just going to put in a plug. As I said to start this is the third of our Better Together series. And so the series is going to wrap up on November 8th. We do have a date. And we're going to be talking about ethical decision making in senior living and care communities. And I think that it really kind of goes along with this conversation. I think that for the past year and a half now, we have been challenged by so many different things related to COVID. And, we talked a little bit today about social isolation. And one of the other things that we've been challenged with is just all of the different decisions that are coming down for senior living communities and what role ethics plays in that. So I hope that you'll all join us on November 8th as well. So Laura, I'll leave our parting words to you.
Oh, just thank you for offering hope and opportunity for people to be their best selves, their best teams, and to create a life worth living for LGBTQ elders. Huge props.
Thank you all for this opportunity to be here today.